Hello guys, welcome to another video on the Code and YouTube channel. And in today's video, I'll be showing us how we can create dynamic forms in React. Now, in some real life situations, users may need to create dynamic fields on a page, that is extra fields. And as a developer, you may not be able to keep track of these fields except you create the form in a dynamic manner where they can probably click on a button that adds the extra fields, and in some cases um, remove some of the extra fields. So that's what we'll be doing today. So stay tuned as we get started. Before we start, I would like you to please click on the like button for this video, as well as click on the subscribe button. This is one of the things that gets me going to create more awesome content for you guys. So I would really appreciate that if you can click on the subscribe button and also engage with the content. I should also note that I created a Telegram channel recently. You can check the link to that channel in the description below. I did this because I want to connect more with you guys. So if you have any form of programming challenges or any questions you want to ask, I'll be very glad to have you on board to ask those questions, which I would gladly answer. Without wasting further time, let's get right into it. In my Visual Studio Code, I already created a project, and I'm going to just create one single file, and we'll call that file form.js. Form.js. So we're gonna generate a functional component with this. What we need to do next is to install React Bootstrap. So I'm gonna head to the React Bootstrap website. So React Bootstrap. I'm gonna search for that on Google. Then I click on the link to the React Bootstrap page. When we get there, we can click on getting started, and then so on the getting started page, we can see that we have different ways in which we can install. We can use npm install React Bootstrap and then Bootstrap, but according to the documentation, I think they said over here the easiest way to install or to make use of Bootstrap is through the CDN. So what you can do is to copy this CDN link and then paste it in the header section of your um, React application. If I head over to my app now and I head over to the public directory, and inside there, if I go over to the index.html file, you can see that I have a Bootstrap CDN already pasted in there. I already have this Bootstrap CDN, so I don't need to do that again. So if you haven't done that, you can do that. Another link you can see here is a some CDN link. How do I get that? If I head over to font the Font Awesome website, I already have an account with them. So inside my account, I have access to a CDN. So when I go over to my profile page, I see somewhere on the sidebar that says Font Awesome CDN. So this is where I was able to grab the CDN. So I also have access to all the Font Awesome icons through this CDN link. So those are the two CDN links we need to set up this project. So heading straight back to form.js, I need to import some things from React Bootstrap. So one of the things I need to import is the form and the column, because we're going to be creating a form. So let me also head back to the documentation and search for form. So under the forms, we have some boilerplates over there. So I'll be making reference to one of them. So you see these tags we have here: form group, controls, and things like that. We need to import them from React Bootstrap. So that's what I'm going to do now. So in my form.js, I'm going to import form as well as call from React Bootstrap. Another thing we need to import is the row. So to do that, I'm going to type import row from React Bootstraps /row, Another thing is the container. We'll make use of a container. So I'm going to say import container from React-Bootstrap / container. And finally, the last thing we need to import is the button. So import button from React-Bootstrap / button. So I'm going to change this variable over here. So I'm going to change it to form page because it's clashing with the form we are importing from React-Bootstrap. So I'll change this to form page. Form page. Now quickly, let's now build out the form. So to do that, I can create a container. So let me create a container. As well as a row. So inside the row, this is where we have our form. So I can just go back to the documentation. I will just copy this particular field up until here. So I'll copy that, then I'll paste it in here. So I need to close the form tag. So for this to stop freaking out. So we'll be having two fields, just two fields here. We'll be having the first name field as well as the last name field. So let's edit that to our taste. So over here we have form group. Inside the form group, I'm going to change this from email address to first name. The type is going to be type of text, not email. Enter first name. So I'm going to remove this text over here. Then before I move forward, I want to put this form control and form label inside a column. So what I'm going to do is inside a row and a column. So I'm going to create a row. So the role is going to have a margin, a class name, a class name of margin top. I'm going to give it a margin top of 5. So we also have a column. So I will just have a column here. So it's going to have so the code, I'm going to give it an attribute of MD. So what I'll do is I'm going to copy this down, this column that contains the form label and the form control. So the next set of fields we need to have is the last name. So I'm going to change this first to last. It's also going to be an input type of text. And then finally, we need to have a button. So inside the button, we're also going to have a column. It's also going to be inside a column. So the button is kind of different. We'll be having two buttons, in fact. So let me remove the form field. So I'm going to have a button over here. So we'll have button. Our button is going to, instead of a default text, it's going to have font awesome icon classes. So I'm going to have the I tag, then it's going to be a class name. So the first one is the plus sign. So I'm going to give it FASFA dash plus. The button is also itself is going to have some classes. So the first class, it's going to have a class name of margin top of 4. So I'm going to duplicate this down for the negative or the minus button. So it's also going to have a margin top, but this is going to be FASFA minus. So we also need to add the submit button, although I think that's not really necessary since we are not submitting the form, but we might just need, let's create it for formality. I will just say button. So inside the button we can have an input type of submit. So I'm going to have a variant of success. And inside the button we'll have a send text. So I think we've done a lot. I would like us to save this and see how it looks on the page. So quickly let me run npm start and see how it looks on the browser. Okay, we need to call this exports in the app.css in the app.js rather. So inside of here we import the tag or the components, and then we'll refresh the page. So there you have it. We can see the page, but I think we still need to make some minor adjustments, like the buttons are clustered together for some reasons. So, and the send button, I don't like where it is, so I might just have to float that to the left hand side of the page. So for the button, let's first add a class to it. So we can just add a margin right of 5, and for the send button we might need to add some default styles. So I'll just say style is equals to open a bracket, so I'll say float to the left. So this is just normal CSS. So let me save that and let's check if there is any difference on the page. So I think this looks much more better. So we have a first name field and a last name field. Now the next thing we need to do is to start writing the default functions that will add the button, the extra fields, and would also subtract the extra fields. So to do that, I'm going to make use of a use state hook in React. So let's import that. So I'm going to use state, use state. So inside the use state we can create a variable and a function. So the first one is going to be const. The first one is going to take in fields, while the second one is going to take in set fields, and we'll set that to use state. We'll make reference to the use state, and it's going to be in form of an array. So inside this array, each form field is going to have an ID. So I'm trying to set some default value for the form. So the first one is going to have an ID, while the second one is going to have first. Okay, yeah, it's going to be inside an array of objects actually. So that's why we're having this thing freaking out. So I need to add the brackets over here. So I think the error should be gone now. Now the second one should have a first name. First name is going to be an empty string, and finally the second field or the last field that is called the last name is going to also have an empty string. So this is the very first step towards creating a dynamic form, defining what the requirement for each field will be. So they are both having empty string. So the next thing we need to do now is to look through our form. So let me quickly do that. To do that, I'm gonna open a bracket. Because this is JSX, it allows us to write JavaScript in HTML. So just below the form.group here, I'm gonna open here, I'm gonna say fields dot map. I'm trying to loop through the map variable we created above. So I'll say fields dot map. Then it's gonna take in a variable called field and as well as another variable called I. So we have an arrow over here. So let me just cut this out and then close it up here, just above the form.group. So we don't have any errors while doing that. So then we need to create a div because of in React requires us to have some parent elements to take in some key. So what I mean is I'm gonna have something like this. This will prevent React. This will help React track each of um the, the current number of fields we have on the page when we look through the page. So I'm going to have something called field.id. So I'm also going to close it up. Yeah, I think that's all. So let me save and see if we have any form of error on the page. Let me open the console also. So there are no errors in the console, which is great. So now we can now start creating our functions. So the first function I want to create is the on change events form event handler. So first I would like to give this form a name. So this is last name. So I'll say last name. Then I can also give it a value called value is also an attribute to get the values of the form field. So I'll just say field dot last name. And finally, we can create the onChange event handler. So I'll just say onChange is equals to, so the name of the variable inside the event handler, we're going to call handle change inputs. This will help us track the values of the form as they change. It's going to take in two variables also. So let me copy these three and then I'll paste it in the first name part of the field. So I'll change this to first name. So field dot, this will be field dot first name. So we can't save this now because if we do, we haven't created this variable yet. So this thing is gonna freak out with some error. So let's quickly create the variable over here. Remember, we are looping through the fields to get access to these values over here, the first name and the last name. So to create a variable for the handle inputs change, or is it handle change inputs we call this? So I'm going to say const handle change inputs is equals to the two variables we created inside of the form. So I'm going to have an arrow function. This will help us keep track of the values of the form, like I said earlier. So inside of here, I can just create a variable called values. Const values is equals to, we spread the fields variable in the use states we created above. So this will be FIELD. I can't spell properly. So inside the field, we can now say values make reference to the variable we created above or the parameter inside of the function, and then set it to the events.target.name, which is gonna be events.target.value. Before we now finally call the set fields here and then pass in the values variable, which now has the value of the fields as they change. So to get an idea of what we are doing here, we need to console log something, and what we need to console log is the event.target.name, just to see the values of the field as we type into the input box. So event dot target.name. So I'm going to save that and then head back to the browser and wait for the page to reload. So we have an error here on line 17, said field is not defined. Let's confirm what they mean by that. Field is not defined. Okay, it's supposed to be fields, not field. So let me save that and see if that error gets corrected. Okay, think we're good to go. Now let me type something inside the first name. Let me type my name, DEJI. Okay, we need to get the value actually, not event dot. Let me make it event dot target dot value. Value and save. So let's try it again. So when I type in my name, DEJI, so you can see my name, and then when I type in my last name, ADESOGA, so we can see that we can now get access to the values. I think we've achieved one major step here. So now what we need to do is to create the handle the functions that will handle the adding of the fields and then the subtracting of the fields. So let's quickly do that now. Let's start with the undo add. So I'm going to create a variable called const undo add. Sounds weird, I guess. So it's going to take in an ID. So inside this function, we're going to have set fields, which we have in our use state. So inside the set fields, we're also going to spread in the fields variable, and then inside the fields variable, we are going to append the ID. Remember, it's everything inside the array. We have an array of ID, last name and first name, or first name and last name in that order. So I'm going to have ID. I'm going to, because I want to increment the value of the ID as we add more fields, so I'm going to say ID plus 2, and then we're going to set in the first name, because anytime we create a new field, we don't want it to have any form of variable, so it's going to be an empty string also when we add a new field. And same thing with the last name, it's going to be an empty string. So this function will help us to add fields to the page. So the next function we need to create is the subtract variable, the subtract function. So I'm going to quickly do const undo subtract, or minus. So inside the subtract is also going to take in a parameter called I. So inside of here we will have a variable called values. So const values is equals to the values of the fields. We'll spread that in there. Then we're going to make use of the dot splice here. Splice is a JavaScript method that helps us to modify an array by removing elements from the array. So I'm going to say values dot splice. We just want to remove one, so I'm just going to say I. That signifies for one to be removed anytime we click the negative button. So I'm just going to set the fields once again. Set fields, and it's going to take in the values, the new values of the removed fields. So we spread that in the values. So now that we've created the variables, we need to append them to the buttons we created below. So the first one is the undo add. So I'm going to copy this undo add, and I'm going to head over to the button that has the FA plus icon. So in here I'm going to have an on click event handler. So I'll say on click is equals to, we have an anonymous arrow function, and it's going to have the undo add. I'm passing the parameter, which is I. Same thing needs to be applied to the undo subtract. So I'm just gonna copy this undo add event handler. I'm gonna paste it here. So let me just, instead of typing it out, let me copy this and then paste this here and do subtract. It's also going to take in a parameter called I. So I think we can test this out now. I think it should work. So let me save and let's see if it's going to work at the very first attempt. So let me add a field. Whoa, as we can see, we have the ability to add fields and also to subtract fields. So there's one more thing I noticed over here. I think if I click on this minus, all our fields will disappear. I don't want this to happen. So to prevent that, I'm going to disable the undo subtract button at that initial state. So what I can do is I'll make use of the disabled attribute. Disabled is equals to, we'll say when the field dot id, when it is equals to 1, we want the field to be disabled. Let's see if this works out the way we want. So we save, and then we see that this particular negative button is disabled at this state. At least we always have a field here. So if I type in anything here and then I add in a new field, you'll see that it's enabled back. So it's kind of make it realistic in a real world situation, because you wouldn't want to take away all your forms in a real world situation. Now the final thing I want us to do is to get the values of this form as we type it on the page, at least to see some of the values instead of logging into the console. And because we're not submitting it to any form of backend API, what we're gonna do is to, normally using JSX, we might just need to open a bracket and probably type in fields.lastname, but because our values here are arrays, we need to map over them. We need to loop through them. So to loop through them, I'm going to say fields.map. I'm going to create another variable called field, and we're going to have an arrow. So inside this arrow, I'm going to have a parent fragment to avoid any form of errors, because React by default likes to freak out when it doesn't have parent elements. So I'm going to create a div. Inside this div, we're going to have a class name called, we're going to give it a margin of 5. So inside this div, we can now have the values of each of our fields. So the first one I want us to have is field.id. So field.id, I'm going to close that. Let me just copy this down twice. So field.id, field.firstname, first name, and finally field.lastname. So I'm going to save that, and then let's see. Let me close this console and refresh the page. So we see by default we have 1, because that's what we have over here. By default, our ID takes in an ID of 1, but when we add a new field, it's going to take, the ID is going to increment by 2, because we have 2 fields. When we add the third one, it's going to be 3. When we add the fourth one, it's going to be 4. So if I add values over here, if I say Michael Owen, so we get the value for 1 as Michael Owen. Then the second one, if I say Brad Traversy, you see we have Brad Traversy at the second one. If I say Gary Simon, see we have Gary Simon as the third one. The fourth one kind of breaks over here, so we don't need to add an extra field, so I'm going to remove that. So we have the first one, Michael Owen, Brad Traversy, and Gary Simon. So if I remove or add, it's going to reflect over here as the state changes. So in situations like this, we want to send it to the backend, you already have the values to each of these fields. It's going to be in an array of objects, just like we set it in the form state. So I think that's all we need for this video. Make sure you like and subscribe. Click on the notification bell. I would really appreciate that. So I think that will be all for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, please put it in the comment section. I'll be glad to hear from you guys. Thank you very much for staying tuned, and I will see you again next time.